Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Forward 50 YouTube channel. We are going to have a conversation with someone who's been a huge supporter of the conference since its inception, the president of Shared Services Canada, Paul Glover. Paul has been fielding tons of questions about leadership in the last few months, particularly in Canada's response to some of the crises. But the architecture and strategy that Shared Services Canada has taken has really transformed the way that government deploys services by allowing a common set of platforms for government departments to build atop. And Paul is one of the architects of that and how it's changed digital government for Canada. So Paul, hi, nice to have you here. You wanted to talk about leadership today, something you're going to be touching on at Forward 50 this year, but we wanted to take a little more time to dig into it more deeply. How are you doing today?
Alistair, great to be here. Thanks for having me, and really looking forward to this conversation with you. And first off, huge thanks to you guys, Forward 50. It's such an important event, and the agenda just looks absolutely outstanding. The speaker lineup that you guys have assembled, so fantastic. The executive stream, all the pieces you brought together. Huge.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been that's one of the benefits of COVID gives us all teleportation, so we can bring in these great speakers from around the world for sure.
Yeah, speaking of teleportation, a lot of people ask me, like, how did you move the government so fast to the digital, everybody working remotely? And it's truly, the numbers are kind of staggering, like right across the board. We were doing maybe a million minutes and phone calls a day, jumped to 5 minutes or 5 million minutes in an average day today. We had almost nobody using Teams, to virtually every public servant today on Teams being able to work remotely. In an average day when there was a snowstorm in Ottawa, we'd peak at maybe 40,000 public servants working remotely. Today, any public servant that needs to be able to work remotely can do that. So that's 400,000 public servants, probably between 200,000 and 300,000 concurrent logins. We don't talk public servants, we talk connections. The numbers are just staggering in terms of that shift and how quickly it happened. So it's just been a tremendous acceleration of the way we work and the way we operate. And I think there's some really neat leadership lessons in all of that.
For sure. I was talking to a friend of mine who works at Fastly. He said just in the first week, they saw like a 25% increase in traffic on the backbone of the internet. But this is much more than bits. This is more about sort of cultural change and getting people okay with working remotely. So those are great numbers, like 5 times increase in the number of calls people are doing and so many people working remotely. But how have the leaders handled the human side of that transition?
Yeah, and I think that's really what we should be talking about today. The technology is impressive, but it's our ability to adapt and cope as human beings that I think is the leadership element of this change and the pace at what it's happened that I'm personally touched by and think is worth exploring. What I was struck by was a couple things. First of all, when the crisis hit, we were able to move fast. And I thought about, well, why was that? And upon reflection, Alistair, a couple things that I think are neat management takeaways. The first is we knew what we wanted to do, and we'd already decided on that before the pandemic. We had a strategic plan. We call it SSC 3.0, and we can share links for all your viewers to that. But fundamentally, the 3.0 said, we need to give people better network connection. If we're going to be digital, they need network. They need better collaboration tools, and we need to focus on the applications and their health. And we had a way we wanted to do that with people who were engaged, enabled, empowered. Now, I'm not going to get into 3.0. What's neat about that and the takeaway for me was when the crisis hit, we didn't say, what should we do? We doubled down on our plan. It's absolutely about giving people network access. Bandwidth was like Christmas. It was just keep giving them more of it. And the collaboration tools, Office 365, Teams for people who ran call centers, getting them virtual call centers in a box so they could do it from home. The technology, yeah, it's all cool. But it was the sense we had a plan. We didn't scramble. We knew what we wanted to do. And people had already talked about how we wanted to do it. Engage the clients. Enable your people, empower them with the tools they need, and let's hold them accountable.
What was the initial
magic sauce?
You say you have a plan, but what was the initial time frame for that plan that the pandemic then accelerated? Because it's great to have a plan, and it's nice that it was waiting around, but why didn't it happen? Like, what was the expected time to roll that out?
Yeah, so that is a brilliant question. It was years. It was literally years. So when you think about, we had a plan to roll out Office 365 in Teams over 3 years. And that was pretty much about a 6 to 7 week plan when you measure it. We had most of the people that needed it within about 5 weeks. So rapid acceleration. We stood up an accessible web-based platform within about 2 weeks that had hundreds of thousands of public servants on it, and then moved to secure environments. Huge acceleration. So when you think about how we compressed the plan, the same was true for the network. And so that acceleration, it went from years to weeks, literally. And that's what I think is so incredible at this whole leadership exercise. To me, there's a couple things about that. So the first is, we knew what we wanted to do, and it was about accelerating it. So then it's a risk question. What are the risks you're willing to take as you move forward? And what's interesting is, as a public service, we tend to focus on cost risk and schedule risk, those two things. Well, guess what? When you're worrying about cost risk, you add cost. When you're worrying about schedule risk, you add schedule. We worried about execution risk. If the Public Health Agency and Health Canada didn't have the tools they need, how could they manage the pandemic and lead the country? And so we were focused on, what can we do to give them what they need? Not what's the schedule, what's the cost. It's how do we execute? And that was game changer. And that changed our approach.
Why is it that organizations tend to focus less on execution risk? Because that certainly seems like it should be as high a priority. Like, the risk of inaction is sort of blameless because nobody didn't not act. You know what I mean? Like, why is it that execution risk is so deprioritized in modern government?
I think it's this false sense of security. Give me the plan, make sure it's perfect, tell me the budget, don't deviate from it. And if you do, my gosh, Paul, we're going to bring you back and hold you accountable. You told us it was going to take 3 years and cost X, and you can't deviate from that. And when you say, look, I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm just going to start doing it. It's funny. We literally did in weeks what we had planned to do in years. Was it perfect? Oh my God, no. Like, let me tell you a little story about Network. It was, okay, it's the weekend. We're going into maintenance, update the network, put as much bandwidth in, turn all the boxes to, use that expression, turn the amps to 11. We were just like, give it to her, get as much done as we could. And then Monday morning, we'd huddle up and say, how much did we get done? How much bandwidth? How many secure remote access points did we add? What worked, what didn't work? Learn from that. And then, okay, Wednesday night, let's try again. Huddle up Thursday and Friday, learn from that, and Saturday, Sunday, do it again. So we took this iterative approach. People talk agile. Okay, that's what we were doing. I don't know, but we were just iterating through this. And we fixed it, not in one fell swoop, but in a series of passes where it progressively got better. Candidly, a couple of weekends we slipped. Things didn't go as well as we wanted, but we learned, and that accelerated what we did, how we did it. And what's remarkable, it cost not that much, not close to what it would have taken if we'd have had planned to do this perfectly all at once over one weekend.
So I'm going to challenge you there. You said Paul Glover is going to get held accountable. When you are being held accountable by whomever it is you need to report to, why aren't they saying, hey, Paul, how come your plan was 3 years, but you got it done in 7 weeks? Like, if you're accountable for execution, then someone should be holding your feet to the fire and saying, Paul, you told us this would cost X and take Y, and it turns out it cost a fraction of X and took a fraction of Y. Why were you sandbagging? Why were you padding the dates? Which of course you weren't, but I'd love to see that kind of accountability coming. Not just, was it accessible, absolutely. Was it risky, but why did you take less time than you said? And this, I think, is the risk, is that if we ever do things faster, we're setting a precedent.
Yeah, so I've thought a lot about that question. And it really comes down to, what is the appropriate risk to be managed, right? If I'm moving a gigantic data center, a mainframe, I'm going to plan the bejesus out of that because I need to, right? And you've got one shot to get that thing right. And so, there are times when, you like woodworking, you measure twice, cut once, because you don't want to screw up that piece of wood. okay, then I'll really focus on planning. There's times when things are really cost relevant, but there's times when actually the real risk is the execution risk. And I think the failure of leadership has not been to spend the time to say, what is the thing that is most critical that we need to focus in on? Absolutely, I was paying attention to cost as we were doing this stuff. Like, no, I'm not writing blank checks. This still has to be a good value for the Canadian taxpayer. But that wasn't what we started with. It was, how quickly can we do it? How much is it going to cost? How confident are we it's going to work? Put all that together and say go or no go. Right. And I think it's that, what's the risk that needs to be managed? I wouldn't do everything this way, but I would be a lot more careful about what risk I want to manage to. What's the predominant risk?
And how do we get leaders to adjust the sort of mental equalizer that they have where the risk is, cost or reliability or execution, or like, how do we get them to sort of, because it feels like in digital, because things are faster and because we can iterate, like you can't, if you're building a battleship, you can't really like launch your MVP battleship and then update it while it's in the ocean. But right. you can do that with digital for almost free. And so, but it feels like we haven't taught ourselves as leaders to adjust the calculus for what's possible in digital. How should an aspiring digital leader convince their organization that it's time to update the equalizer, if you will, to change the little sliders?
I think you just have to start. I know that sounds a little bit too cute, but you've got to actually start these processes to see the difference, just how empowering they are, what a game changer it would be. In my wildest dreams, I never thought we could have compressed a 3-year plan to weeks, right? It is, how do you do that? And that's the power when you get into this and unlock it. And the risks aren't that high. We weren't spending big dollars every weekend trying to see what we could do. And once we saw what we could do, it became kind of addictive. Like, oh my God, look what we did last weekend. What can we get done this Wednesday night? What can we get done next weekend? And you see the power of it once it gets going. So I think once you understand it, but we have this false sense of security around project and cost. The other thing as senior leaders is we have to accept that maybe we haven't been paying attention to the right things, right? It's very easy for me to say, what's the plan this weekend versus what are you going to try and how confident are you? And those are different. And then it becomes, well, geez, how comfortable am I with that risk?
So I'm gonna ask you to unpack that a little, because there's a lot of content that you just said, which I think is like, first of all, thanks for doing this and being so candid about it. When you're doing something like rolling out bandwidth, it's measurable. You can say we were at 100 megs yesterday, we're at 200 megs today. So there's a nice objective thing that you can measure, and there's also a fairly smooth incremental shift. Like your minimum viable product for bandwidth is 100 megs, and your next upgrade is 200, and then it's a gig, and then it's a terabit, whatever. Wouldn't that be nice? But as we move through those tiers, you have a smoother sort of gradual rollout and clear feedback on did the thing work or not, which allows you to adjust. And as you know, like iterating in any kind of agile way, you need two things. You need something bite-sized that you can do in one cycle or one sprint, and you need feedback on whether that thing worked. And that's not always possible in more subjective things or in the pilot launch of some particular project, which obviously has to be accessible and functional and so on. How much is the feedback on, like, did it work, important to that iterative cycle, and how can leaders find it?
Oh, it's everything. That was what made it work. That was what would tell us if what we did in that particular weekend was worth it. And that was what would help me calibrate the risk. You know what? We can take a little bit more risk because the feedback is good. We've got a little bit of social license. People have appreciated what we got done. And you know what? Or, oh, that didn't go so well. People are kind of frustrated. Let's take a less risky approach this weekend. Frankly, a large part of my job through all of this stuff was not technical. It was calibrating that risk. No, you're not leaning in hard enough. We can take more risks. We got to focus on getting Department X what they need. Whoa, I think we did enough for them. We can dial it back. I wouldn't want that to blow up in our face. It was that constant calibration to tell people what the safe zone was, to give them that feedback. And for me, It was those feedback loops you were talking about. It was real data. How many secure remote accesses did they have? What's the bandwidth on those? How functional are they? And then feedback from the departments, the deputies, the ministers, who were saying, we're seeing improvement, but now I need even more, or I'm good for next, I can turn to the next department. The feedback loops, and then you calibrating those things to tell your teams what to do, how to behave. That's the leadership challenge.
So a few things you just, sorry, go ahead.
But the other thing as a leader is you got to learn to let go. In these kind of environments, you've got to trust your people. You've got to make sure, I talk about engaged, enabled, empowered. They have to be engaged on what the real problem is you're trying to solve. Like, we didn't doubt that. We knew what we were doing. They were engaged. They were focused. They were enabled. They had the tools they need. They had the budget they need. And we empowered them to make the decisions so that if things were going bad, they could course correct because they knew what the parameters were to operate in on. And I wasn't trying to micromanage this stuff, not even close. We gave them the parameters to work within, and we let them go. And you know what? They loved that. My employee satisfaction surveys through the roof. People are doing what they want to do, what they love to do.
Well, and they feel like they're doing something. They feel like they're doing what government is supposed to do, which is help itself and citizens. And I think the story of what the government had to do internally to make this work is maybe even more compelling than the stuff we see in the public sector, or in the public field, I mean, about CERB and so on. You just said 4 very interesting things, and I wish I were taking more furious notes here. I'm trying to type a couple of them down, but I'm going to prompt you with them. First of all, this idea that leadership in the modern world is about risk calibration. How many leaders do you think have a proper understanding of the true risks of what they're delivering, including risks of inaction?
I think candidly, the public service, much of its leaders have been developed through policy, right? As a country, we're dealing with policy issues, policy challenges, and crises, and the ability to kind of navigate through, a Charlottetown Accord, those political crises and the policy challenges. But as we're seeing today in a digital world, operations matter. And I think one of the things for anybody that's watching this is it's not enough to just pay attention to policy. It's not enough just to pay attention to crisis management. The rubber hits the road on operations, and that's where you build credibility with your clients. That's where you build trust. That's where Canadians will see that value. And I think that we need to spend more time making sure that senior leaders are well-rounded on all of those aspects. In my world, as a deputy minister, as a president of shared services, I got to pay attention to policy, got to pay attention to politics. But man, oh man, you got to make things work. They have to run. And that's same for, the deputy at CRA, at ESDC, those people running CERB. Operations matter. They matter a lot. And we got to pay way more attention to them than we have been.
So the second thing you said in that sentence was that you had feedback that told you whether to step on the gas or take your foot off it. How many government projects have the level of analytics that you think should exist? Because many of the people in government I've talked to, when I say, do you have analytics about online versus offline satisfaction, or what are you measuring? I hear crickets. Like, there's really no data other than, like, they might measure the end product and say, 70 people submitted the form today. But there's very little thinking about it as a process or a job to be done with analytics along the way. It seems to me like if you're going to calibrate risk properly and you need that feedback, we need to get much more analytical about measuring the services we deliver.
Yes, and we got to build it in, right? Like, it was not an afterthought. Like, that was part of what the team was doing, and they had goals and they had targets, so they could come back and say, it was at X and we moved it to X plus. We had this many secure remote access points and we were able to increase it. The bandwidth was, the traffic flows were, they are now. And you have to build that in. You can't after the fact say, oh, I'm interested in, can somebody go back and get me an answer to this critical question? You've got to work that right from the outset, and it has to be natural products coming back to you. And they have to be coming back in real time. Because back, Alistair, what we're talking about here, if you're moving at this speed, I needed to know Monday morning what happened Sunday night. I needed to know what worked and what didn't work so we could calibrate that risk moving forward. So those feedback loops have to be genuine, they have to be authentic, you have to trust them, and they have to be timely. If they're not that, you're dead in the water. And that's not off the corner of a desk. That's not an afterthought. That's built in. Everybody understands what you're going to look at, how you're going to use it to drive the decision making. And it was funny, after a period of time, I became very predictable. They knew how I was going to react to the data, what I was going to say, and where they needed to go.
Well, that goes even more to letting them be empowered, because they're like, don't bother Paul. We know what he's going to say. Let's just do it, which is great.
Correct.
Yeah,
exactly.
So you said that the analytics have to be timely and accurate, but it also sounds like you were in a much more experimental mindset. And if you look at evolution and natural selection, we have these periods in the fossil record of relative stability, followed by like some kind of change that produces the Cambrian explosion, tons of speciation and so on. Nature wants to adapt. We are clearly adapting to COVID, to economic issues, whatever else. But it seems like we need to teach people that even when it feels like there isn't a need to adapt, we have an experimentation mindset. That can be done by scaring people. It can also be done by communicating to them that one of the things I often talk to organizations about, private and public sector, is how a feature can become a liability because of technology. So in the old days, taxi cabs were amazing. You could stand on the corner of the road, put your hand out, and someone would drive you somewhere else without you needing to own a car. That was like a miracle, right? Or I didn't have to go out in the sleet and take my video back. I could pay one night's late fee, and I didn't. Oh, great. Thank you, Blockbuster. I can get a good night's sleep instead of driving in the rain and slush to take this video back. And then those features like hailing a cab, now the user's interface for a taxi is, I'm going to stand on a street corner in the rain, waving my arm, wondering if the person who picks me up is going to drive away because they don't like the color of my skin or how far I've asked them to drive me. That's a horrible user experience. And oh, by the way, when I get in, if I'm murdered, no one knows what happened. Right. And so now Uber came in and went, you know what's easier? I mean, Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing companies, what's easier is a phone. And so I think what happens is technologies and things that used to seem a feature suddenly become a liability. You know, the old, oh, don't worry, you don't have to come in, you can fax us your form. People are like, fax? What's a fax? And I think that we, as in all kinds of organizations, underestimate the risk inherent in a technology turning what used to be a feature into a liability. And I know that wasn't really a question, but I'd like your thoughts on how leaders can or policymakers can include the risk of technological advances turning features of the public service into liabilities.
Yeah, that's a great question. And let me tell you, I got a couple of thoughts on that. The first is, as policy leaders, as leaders in the bureaucracy, we have to embrace the very thing you're saying. I've seen it firsthand. So I can tell you, in a previous job, I headed things like the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And I used to say to folks, because it was regulatory, how many people took an Uber? And at the time, all the hands would go up in the audience. And it's unregulated and you're a bunch of regulators. Why are you doing that? Because they trusted it. Why did they trust it? Because they could see the star rating of the vehicle that was coming to pick them up. And they trusted other people to make sure that it was good. It built trust. And that trust displaced the regulatory system, right? That's the power of technology. And that's what we have to understand can happen as we move through these things. We can't be complacent because we are the government, because we are the federal government, because we are the regulator, the policy leader, that we will always be the natural leader. There is this opportunity for this kind of positive disruption. And I think it boils down to anything that builds more confidence in the user, that is centered around them, their experience, that they will put their faith and trust in that because they understand it better. And they understood that star rating, and they understood where it came from because they put one on that made them confident, and they didn't worry about the regulatory system.
That's fascinating. I mean, that suggests that the rise in the mistrust of, I know we're outside the rails a little here, but it's an interesting hypothesis that the rise in the mistrust of government is because government's regulation has been replaced by the wisdom of the crowds in platforms where people can report on whether a company's up to bad things or they didn't like their eBay delivery or whatever. That's an interesting question.
You know what, though? It was always that way. right? Why did we start food regulation? Because flour was being cut with sawdust way back, and people were dying, they were getting sick, all those kinds of things. And so it's just the tools are evolving. And I think that's the point that you're making, is we have to understand the tools will continue to evolve. And we, as policy leaders, as public servants, as senior leaders within our own teams, need to embrace that change, need to understand it's going to happen. And, that's that old Gretzky, do you want to be chasing the puck, or do you want to be skating to where you think the puck's going to be? It's a lot funner to skate to where you think the puck's going to be than to be constantly chasing it. And that's what we have to do more of with technology. Where is it going? And what's its potential to influence in a positive way what I'm trying to do? And so, isolation through COVID, oh my God, with the first week or two was terrible when we didn't have the video Teams, the things that we're doing today to be able to connect to each other. And think about what that's doing to the people's mental health, their sense of isolation, to be able to see somebody, not just hear their voice. Game changing. That's the power of technology. That's what we got to tap into.
So I'm glad I took notes, because there's so much signal to noise in this. There's a lot of wisdom coming out of this stuff. You mentioned, I have been taking furious notes. You mentioned risk calibration, analytics, experimentation mindset. And the last thing you said was rollback. You said if it didn't work, we could roll it back. The ability to roll back is something that's uniquely digital. I got a copy, and the copy is as cheap as its predecessor, right? Making a copy of something's easy. I can't roll back to the previous battleship. I have to build 2 battleships. But I can roll back to the previous version by restoring a file system. And so It seems to me like if you have this rollback ability, if you design things, I like what Taiwan does, where they have the production and the experiment, and you can literally change a letter in the URL from GOV to G0V. And now you're using the experimental one and then flip back. So can leaders use the fact that digital can be rolled back to get their teams to be more comfortable with an experimental culture?
Oh, absolutely. And I think leaders can use that feature, that fact, with their teams and with their clients and the people they serve to build trust and build confidence. And again, back to the risk calibration, there would be times where I would call up deputy colleagues and say, here's what we're going to try this weekend. It may or may not work, but if it doesn't, don't worry, we'll just roll back. And so it's a big risk, but if it works, there'll be a big benefit. And if it doesn't, we'll just roll back. It'll maybe take an hour to roll the network and all the settings back, but boy, oh boy, if it works. And that sense of transparency, that understanding of the risk we're taking, that understanding of the safety net that exists builds confidence. We had some who was like, no, we can't give you that maintenance window. There's too much at risk. You can't do it. And when we started to explain how we would mitigate that risk, that we could roll back, what it would mean, how quickly we could do it, it allowed them a sense of, first of all, understanding, visibility, that led to trust, that led to confidence, and we were able to move. These are wonderful things that build on themselves, that create, and again, we talk technology, but it's people who use these tools, who deploy these systems, and you got to give them the environment where they got a fighting chance to make it work. And that's what these rollbacks and some of these things do. It gives people a sense of understanding, of confidence that allows you to take those risks. Very powerful.
So when we had all the digital ministers on from the provinces and Minister Murray, one of the things that we talked about was this, and I think this came up with Jen Pahlka as well, it's come up a few times, is that we need to legislate with the app in mind. That these days we design an app to deal with the existing law, as opposed to designing a law that can be turned into an app. And that if we change the way that we enacted policies and laws with a mindset to this will be delivered digitally, it would make the job of the departments who have to deliver those services far easier. Is that something you've run up against where, the legislation makes it really hard?
So I think one of your speakers, Pierre Andrews, first caught me onto this. And, when you think about a country like Canada, and we draft, and I used to be, a big regulator, we would draft regulations, we do it in English and in French. Well, why not in digital as well? Here's how it means, here's how it will be interpreted. What does that look like? Because that's going to matter moving forward. And I think absolutely we have to do that. We have statutes today. I know from my days at Health where we were trying to get rid of them, where it said the way to submit it was through paper, and if not paper, then fax. And you're kind of like, oh my God. And people are like, well, we have to fax it. I don't want to fax, but the law says I have to send it to you via fax. And no other. We've got to clean that stuff up. We have to embrace the digital reality. And we have to actually, I think, find ways that are less prescriptive, more outcome in terms of what we're trying to achieve, given that pace of change we've talked about today. So that you don't lock it in, well, I want it in a PDF, because maybe it's not going to be a PDF. And in the future, we have to be a little bit more. The point is, you're going to submit data, and we'll figure out how to receive that from you and move forward. I absolutely think that pace of change, we need to structure the legislation so that it's more facilitative and enabling to the outcome rather than prescriptive about the approach. Because that.
Well, and if you legislate the analytics you're going to collect, and you legislate what the process is for rolling back, like if you say this is what it looks like to go back, then you've made it much easier for a leader to advocate for experimentation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I have two quick questions. I've written down a bunch more notes, including code should be the third national language, which I love. But I want to talk about the structure of government. In the old days, we had mainframes, and those mainframes were centralized and they were expensive, and you controlled access to them and you worked with them in their language. You carried the punch cards to 2 in the morning. And today, modern computing uses clouds, which are widely distributed, and microservices, and they get spun up and torn down as need be. Amazon famously uses its 2 pizza team model, that any team you can't feed with 2 pizzas is too big. Could you see a world where the federal government is structured more like a cloud and less like a mainframe? Well,
for the record, it depends how big those 2 pizzas are. You could feed hundreds of pizzas of people if those pizzas are big enough. So with all respect to Amazon, it's about scale. I think that's the heart of your question. And it is about transition. And I do think, we have a lot of those old mainframes, a lot of important things run on them, reside there. But we are moving to cloud. And we're going to live in both those worlds for a while, but that change is real. It's happening. I think the real issue for governments, not just Canada, not just the federal government, is it's structural. The issues that we're talking about, and really the way to tap into some of these capabilities, is that they are horizontal. But our government tends to be organized in vertically. You have, the food department, the health department, the border department, the defense department. But we're talking about systems and capabilities that interact with citizens and Canadians that cut across that. So while we are mostly vertical in our governance, we need to introduce more horizontal to truly capture the benefit. If we just move to cloud, but we preserve the verticals, then there isn't the benefits, right? How do we, the concept of API stores, sharing functionality, again, back to Amazon, any data you collect will be shareable with anybody else in the organization. Some of those mantras they had that promote more horizontality, that then allows us to better focus on service to Canadian business. That's the challenge. To still be vertical, but to also behave horizontally, collectively when we need to.
Okay, so last question, because we should wrap this up, but it's fascinating. You talked a lot about leadership. It's I'm sure everybody felt very empowered and was delighted to be delivering the services and tools that were needed to keep the country functioning. But I think that we also, there's no doubt this is an incredibly stressful, difficult time. If leaders are constantly forcing their teams, encouraging their teams to react to risk, and the threat of obsolescence is constantly looming, and every week is a new experimentation, how do you manage mental health in that world? Because burnout is real. COVID's been very hard for people. As a leader, how do you factor in the risk of mental health and the risk of marginalization into your calculus about experimentation and can you roll it back and so on?
Yeah, listen, first of all, thank you for ending on that question, because anytime I talk about this, I always say the most valuable resource any organization has is its people. They're the ones that take the ideas, take the technology, and translate them into some action, some benefit. It starts, stops, and ends with the people. You got to get that right. That is job one for any leader. Create the environment that allows your people to do. I don't do, my teams do. And you got to create the environment. That's leadership at the highest level. That's what you have to focus in on. I come back to some things, Alistair, we talked about. Teams that are engaged, they're enabled, they're empowered, will not view this sort of change as threatening. They will view it as necessary growth. And I've found what I've had to do is actually encourage them to slow down. We need to develop rosters, depth charts, make sure people are taking the time off because they see the potential of what they're doing and they want to help. They want to move forward. Most people come to work wanting to do a good job, wanting to make a difference. And when you give them the environment that allows them to do that, they feel good about that and they want to contribute. So I think that's the real risk, is that you do run that risk of burnout, not because I'm telling them to do more, because they're feeling that weight of what they can do, what they want to do based on the need, because they're so engaged in the problem. But important, as you said, is calibrating. We moved really fast at the beginning because we needed to, but we can't sprint the marathon. We needed to come out of the gates hard so that every public servant could work remotely. Now that we've got that, we got to slow down or I'm going to burn people out. And so you've got to manage pace. There's times when you got to go fast and there's times when you got to ease back. In doing that, we're working really closely with employees, back to, again, data, surveying them, lots of little pulse checks. How are we doing? You're getting the information you need. You're getting the breaks you need, the rest, and adjusting to what they're telling us relative to the environment and what we need to be doing. That, and in this COVID, there's a lot of, don't underestimate the, some people love this technologies, other people really feel isolated by it, and taking the time to connect with people. The stuff that used to happen when you'd ride the elevator together, how's it going? You need to not start every meeting with the meeting. You need to connect with people as human beings, give them that space to tell you how they're doing, or not wait for a meeting, just call them. What's going on? How are you doing? And then make sure as an organization, you have the wellness supports that they're going to need, because eventually someone's going to need it and you have to be ready to support them when they ask for that help.
Yeah, I have a friend who's the CEO of a fairly big tech company who started doing Friday afternoons. They used to do like Friday beers at 3, and he just started doing Friday book readings to his company's employees and their kids.
Wellness Wednesdays. They're always oversubscribed. Bring someone in, talk about whatever the employees are struggling with that particular
week.
Just
office hours, like leave a Zoom room open. In this case, he was actually volunteering to read all the employees' kids a book for the hour. So he'd pull out a few kids' books and read to them so the employees could have some time to themselves. But the employees were like, oh, this guy's in my house helping with my family. That's great. And it was just such a good message of like where the priorities are. It doesn't take a lot. I think this is one of the lessons we've learned from the whole crisis, is that for everything that was taken away, there's something new that's possible. Being able to, as I said at the beginning, teleport people in from elsewhere for a few minutes conversation, which was unthinkable, is now commonplace. So Paul,
do good work, right? And help them to do good work, but don't take it for granted. Don't burn them out. And it's amazing what you can achieve.
Right. I like the don't start every meeting with a meeting. So I've taken copious notes. Frankly, I think this could be a short book. I'm not actually kidding. There's a lot of content in here. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. I know you're going to be a part of Forward 50 this year, as you have been in the past, and you're going to be doing a number of talks, and you're helping us get the word out to everyone. We really hope that it's a good opportunity for digital leaders to learn some of these things, and not only the technology, but also the culture and the leadership. And yeah, we have about 3 weeks left, so no stress at all. We'll sleep in December. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. This has really it's been great to go a little deeper in what's happened behind the scenes to make all this happen. And I'm going to take these notes and write something up based on this, just because I think these underlying messages you have about the job of a leader is to calibrate risk, to understand if you're going too fast or too slow. You need analytics. You need this experimental mindset with the ability to roll back in order to take those risks. And then you need, as a leader, to make sure that your humans are okay, and sort of calibrate for the risk of burnout to achieve this stuff. That sounds like a pretty good plan, not just for a pandemic response, but for digital leadership in general.
Well, you summed that up just brilliantly. So I'm not going to say anything other than thank you. It was a pleasure to chat with you today. And I think this leadership stream that you're putting together around Forward 50, executives, as we talked about earlier, need to pay attention to these things. These are important conversations for all of us to be having. and I'm just thrilled to be asked to be part of them, and look forward to supporting you and the Forward 50 conference. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Paul.